Try to see these three images. What do they have in common? They are all images of Africa, the kind of images that we have seen thousands and thousands of times, because these are the kind of images that we see of Africa. And what do these images have in common? Well, they are telling the same story, one story. The story about a continent that needs help, that is full of people and problems that needs help and solving. It's a continent that's open to be fixed by other people, a continent of people that can't do it themselves. It's the same stereotypical story over and over again. It's this story that I want to speak with you about today. But let me first introduce myself. My name is Vibeke Quaade. I'm the board chair of Crossing Borders, and for the past more than 20 years I've worked with communications for international NGOs or institutions under the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A lot of the time I lived and worked outside Denmark. So I've lived in China, in the UK, in Uganda for a long time, and for shorter periods in other East African countries. And I also lived and worked in Bangladesh. Now, when you are a communications person and you tell stories, whether they are written or spoken or in the form of messages, or they are videos or still photos, you are part of presenting a collective image of whatever narrative it is that you are speaking about. So images of Africa and Asia, because that's the places where I worked, has been core in my career. And I became aware of the dangers of presenting a stereotypical image very early on. It was when I lived in China. One day I was in the so-called friendship store in Beijing and looking at the English books. I stumbled over a title called The Psychology of the Chinese People. It seemed mad and it stuck in my mind, because how was it possible to talk about one psychology of 1 billion people? It just didn't make sense. It was obvious it was a title that was made for those who were going to read the book and not for those who were portrayed in the book. And it's the same story with Africa. It's that one story that doesn't tell the many stories that, of course, is there. So even though my first experience with stereotypical images was in China, today I want to speak about Africa and that persisting image that we see of Africa. If you go back 100 years and you look at the English popular culture at the time, the staging of Africa and Africans are children to be helped. It's very clear and very horrible to see. It's in the literature, it's in visual arts, it's in the media and in advertisement. It's always the same. The relationship between the motherland and the colonies were depicted as a kind of parent-child relationship where it was a duty of the motherland to help the children in the colonies with their development and their growing up. It's obvious, of course, that it's Darwinism and the hierarchy at the time of races that's lurking behind it all. Those who created the images were also those it was targeted to. It was targeted to talk to the superior ones about the, at that time, inferior ones, the Africans in the colonies in the developing countries, as we call them today. Seen in hindsight, it was, of course, all about justifying the colonial project. And in the advertisement, the image was much more clear than anywhere else in the popular culture. There were many cleaning advertisements at that time, and you would see African children there frequently. You would see them being bleached or washed white in bubbly white soap, smiling all over the face at finally reaching the white ideal. Completely made for those who were seeing it. Today, the image of Africa are fortunately not as clear-cut and horrible as it was at that time. A lot has happened, and rightly so. We have all learned. But nevertheless, there are still similarities between the way people from Africa were portrayed 100 years ago and today. And this is true in the news media and in popular culture, and unfortunately also in the communications material that humanitarian and development organizations use. If you look at organizations like Oxfam or Red Cross or ActionAid or the British DFID or the American USAID or the Danish DANIDA, the images of Africa still leaves that impression of an inferior Africa in need of assistance. That's the story that we hear from Africa. It's primarily about a continent that needs help from somewhere else. The terrible thing is that it's everywhere. It's not only in like one campaign, it's in the publications, in the reports, on the websites, on the YouTube videos or documentaries. And it's coming up whether it's about governance or health or education or infrastructure. The overall story is like in the beginning of the 20th century. Africa needs our help to develop. So when you see images or hear stories of women who go off for miles on a daily basis to fetch water or firewood, or you see the school children who have to deal with one teacher for 120 kids, or we hear about financial fraud and corruption by the African heads of state, it's all about the same. The reason why we hear these stories are for campaigning reasons. The organizations, of course, know that when you show a picture of a child or an image of a child that needs food, if you show anyone in need, what do you want to do? You want to help. So it's like, it's the fundament of our funding to Africa of the development aid. And you can also say there's nothing wrong with it, because of course some people need help, right? And it's like you want to help, so why not just do it? What is so bad about showing these images and stating that aid should be given to some? Well, the thing is that an image is not just an image, and a story is not just a story. Stories and images are not torn away from reality. They are part of a reality and a particular discourse, and they are also making reality, especially if they are repeated again and again and again, as the story about Africa is. So if all we see are images of a continent in need, it starts becoming a reality. We start to believe it. It becomes the one thing that we see when we see Africa or we see African people. A continent and a people in need. What's really worse is that it spills over to the media. The Western media are not well funded when it comes to covering Africa. So they take a lot of the stories from the humanitarian aid and development organizations. And add to that the war and conflicts that they like to portray. It's like a full image of something or a continent in need. So you can say in a way that the development organizations have won big time, because they're actually making the image they show of Africa the image that is being shown of Africa. It's not right. I mean, it's definitely not right. And something has happened, of course, for the last, especially 10 years. but still it's a persisting image. And I think that if you do work in international development and you work in communications, you have a responsibility, because you can choose the kind of image that you show. You can choose to make it play into the existing image, and sometimes you have to, because your job is requiring that of you. But you can also ask yourself a question whether it has to be that image or not, or you can choose another one. So, you know what? Be aware of the brutal images. Be aware of how you choose your words. You can choose what kind of story that you're working on, the story that you want to portray.